I never expected the overnight shift at Walmart to feel like stepping into another world. During the day, the store was a rush of fluorescent light, carts clattering, kids screaming, and managers barking orders. But at night, it was something else entirely. The aisles stretched out like corridors in a museum, the hum of freezers and fluorescent bulbs replacing the usual chaos. You could hear your own heartbeat if you paid attention. I'd started working nights just to pay bills while finishing my last year of college. It wasn't glamorous, and I knew it wouldn't be exciting, but it was steady. There was something comforting in the routine, the quiet, the solitude, the way the night made every small task feel more meaningful. I learned which aisles creaked under weight, which lights flickered at certain times, which freezers groaned in rhythm with the wind outside. People often asked why anyone would want to work nights, and I used to joke, because ghosts are better company than customers. I didn't mean it seriously, of course. At least, I didn't think I did. It was during my third week on the shift that I first noticed her. I was restocking toys around 3 a.m., the aisles empty except for the occasional distant clatter of a falling can or the soft hum of the store's heating system. I was on my knees putting dolls on the lower shelves in aisle 14 when I felt a presence. There she was, a woman standing perfectly still in front of a wall of dolls. Her cart was empty. I assumed she was a late-night shopper. "Excuse me, ma'am?" I asked, trying to sound polite but not too alarmed. "Do you need help finding something?" She didn't answer. I stepped closer. That's when she turned her head toward me. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and she whispered, almost like a shadow carried her voice. "They don't blink when the lights go out." Before I could respond, the overhead lights flickered. I blinked and she was gone. I spun toward the end of the aisle. No one. The cart was still there, upright and empty. But the woman, whatever she had been, was gone. I shook my head, telling myself I must have been tired. Maybe I was imagining it. But the unease didn't leave me. Even after my shift ended, I couldn't get her words out of my head. The next night, I mentioned it to Todd, a stock clerk who'd been working nights for over 10 years. "Yeah," he said, almost too casually. "Aisle 14. You're not the first. Cameras have caught someone there a few times, just standing. No one ever sees them come in or leave. Security checked. Nothing. It's weird." My stomach tightened. "You're serious?" "Yep. Happened a few nights a week, usually between 2 and 4 a.m. No explanation. Some of us just avoid that aisle when we can." And that's how I learned nights at Walmart weren't just quiet. They were different. Things happened when the store emptied out, when the hum of fluorescent lights became the only sound in the world, when the line between what's real and what's imagined seemed to blur. The next night I approached aisle 14 cautiously. My flashlight bounced off the linoleum floor, casting long shadows over the empty shelves. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a trick of fatigue. But then I saw her again. Same position, same unblinking stare. Her cart was empty, like it had been the night before. Ma'am?" I said, stepping closer. "Do you need help?" Her head turned slowly, almost too deliberately, and her lips moved. "They don't blink when the lights go out." My voice caught in my throat. I wanted to ask what she meant, but before I could form words, the lights flickered, and she vanished. Again. I rushed to the end of the aisle. The camera above me didn't show her walking in or out. Todd was right. There was nothing on footage, just an empty aisle and an abandoned cart. I stayed by the entrance of the aisle, tense, my heart pounding. "Who are you? What do you want?" I whispered. My voice felt stupid in the silence. Then I noticed something strange. The dolls on the shelves, the ones closest to where she had been, were all slightly angled toward the aisle as if someone had been watching from there. "Okay," I muttered to myself. I'm not crazy. It's just... something weird is happening." I left a note on the cart, thinking it was ridiculous, but it felt right. "If you're real, show yourself." Nothing happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she had a purpose, a message, something she needed to tell me. I decided to try recording the aisle on my phone the next night. If this was just some trick of my mind, I wanted proof. I set up my phone leaning against the cart, aimed at the doll display. Then I stepped back, holding my breath. Hours passed. The store was dead silent, the only sounds the hum of freezers and my own slow breathing. Then, around 3 a.m., I saw movement from the corner of my eye. She appeared. The same pale dress, same unblinking eyes. She didn't move. She just stood there, staring at the dolls. I raised my phone. I don't know what you want, I said softly. Her lips barely moved. They don't blink when the lights go out. And then, as if the air itself swallowed her, she vanished. I checked the footage the next day. The phone recorded her for a split second, a blurry figure. But then nothing. Just static. Then my reflection in the screen. Todd raised his eyebrows when I told him. I told you, he said. Aisle 14 is different. People have been seeing her for years. Nobody knows who she is. Cameras don't catch her. I became obsessed with learning who or what she was. I searched online for incidents, for anything similar in retail night shifts, and found stories of store spirits, of people appearing in empty aisles, of eyes that never blink. Nothing concrete, only theories. I asked managers and old employees if anyone remembered anything unusual in aisle 14 before I started. Oh yeah, one said. We used to hear whispers near the dolls at night, always gone before anyone could see. I started leaving small offerings on the shelves, a stuffed animal, a note, a candy bar. It felt childish, maybe even silly, but it was a way to acknowledge her presence. The next night, the dolls closest to the offerings were slightly tilted again, like she had been examining them. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was something. A connection. Eventually, I stopped trying to chase her. I no longer approached the aisle expecting an explanation. I accepted that some things exist in ways we can't fully understand. I started speaking quietly to her when I stocked the shelves. I see you. I hear you. And sometimes I swear she paused, just slightly, acknowledging me. The fear disappeared, replaced by curiosity and respect. Nights at Walmart were still quiet, but the aisles felt alive in a strange, respectful way. A reminder that not all presences are malevolent. Some simply exist, silent, watching and waiting. Some mysteries cannot be explained, and some presences cannot be understood. Life is about respect, acknowledging the unseen, listening even when you don't fully comprehend, and understanding that patience, awareness, and quiet empathy often matter more than answers. The world is bigger than we think, and kindness extends even to what we cannot see. I've always believed that some places breathe on their own. The 7-Eleven on Forest Avenue was like that. It wasn't just a store. It was a living, waiting thing. I was 26 in 2020, stuck working night shifts while most of Portland slept. My grandfather owned the store, though I never understood why. He was old, strict, and secretive. He claimed the shop had history. All I saw were sticky floors and buzzing neon lights that hummed like mosquitoes in my skull. That night the storm came hard, slamming against the windows and shaking the glass doors like fists demanding to be let in. I was sweeping up chip crumbs when she walked in. Mrs. Weaver. Everyone in town had a story about her. Some said she was a banshee. Some said she'd outlived 3 husbands because she'd cursed them. To me, she was just a frail old woman who always bought tea, bread, and milk. "Help me to the back, dear," she whispered, leaning heavy on her cane. Her hands shook as she carried a basket of groceries. I hesitated. Customers weren't supposed to go into the back, but there was something about her voice, the way the storm seemed to pause when she spoke. I nodded and guided her past the aisles. She smelled faintly of rain-soaked earth. When I opened the staff lounge door, my grandfather was sitting at the table, papers and invoices spread out like he'd been waiting. His gray eyes flicked to me, then to Mrs. Weaver and back again. "You think bravery replaces wisdom?" he snapped, before I could explain. "You gamble with your life in my store?" Mrs. Weaver coughed into her sleeve. "The boy saved me. Reckless, yes, but he has a good heart." For the first time in years, my grandfather softened. He didn't smile. He just nodded once, slow and heavy, like something had been decided. Morning brought no calm. The storm had cleared, but the air clung thick, heavy, like a warning. I unlocked the front and found muddy paw prints smeared across the floor. Not dog prints. Too large, too misshapen. I scrubbed them up before customers arrived, trying not to think about it. Grandfather handed me a list as I poured stale coffee into a paper cup. His handwriting was sharp, almost angry. Reinforce the doors. Install wards above the entrance. Rearrange shelves for defensive stock. "What the hell is this?" I asked. "Your foolishness drew eyes," he said flatly. "Now we prepare." I laughed at him, because what else could I do? Wards? Silver chains? Salt jars lined up next to gum and cigarettes? It sounded insane. But he didn't laugh. He just stared through me like he was already seeing something worse. By noon, rumors had spread. Word got out about the fight I'd broken up the night before, how I'd stood my ground against some rowdy drunks. In town, stories grow legs fast. Some folks started showing up asking if we sold charms, talismans, protection. Grandfather didn't turn them away. He stocked shelves with jars of salt, bundles of sage, even iron nails wrapped in twine. At first I grumbled, but went along. What was the harm in making a little extra cash off superstition? But when I was restocking the cooler, I noticed the glass door had new cracks, long and jagged, like claws had raked across it during the night. I stared at them for too long, my stomach twisting. That evening, Mrs. Weaver shuffled back in. She handed me a tin of cookies wrapped in faded cloth. "For my favorite," she teased, her voice rasping like the storm itself. I rolled my eyes but thanked her. Later, when I bit into one, I caught myself smiling. It felt strange, like maybe, in this bizarre place, I belonged. Business boomed in ways I couldn't explain. People weren't coming just for Slurpees or cigarettes anymore. They came for supplies. The shelves of silver chains and salt jars emptied faster than I could restock. Even college kids showed up late at night, daring each other to buy charms from the haunted 7-Eleven. Grandfather worked silently, his face unreadable, though sometimes I caught him muttering under his breath in the back room. His words were sharp, like prayers or curses. Once I asked him what he was saying. He didn't answer. He just told me to mop the floor. Still, unease built inside me. Each night as I closed, I felt the woods pressing closer. The neon lights barely cut through the darkness, and when the wind carried through the trees, it sounded less like branches and more like growls. One night, just before midnight, a group of rough-looking guys stumbled in. They weren't the usual drunks. Their eyes were wrong, too wide, too bright, like they hadn't blinked in hours. They laughed at nothing, knocked over displays, and cornered me near the counter. "You sellin' that magic salt?" one sneered. His teeth looked too sharp in the fluorescent light. "Store's closing soon," I said, trying to sound steady. The biggest one leaned in, his breath sour. "Maybe you should stay open. For us." My hands shook as I reached under the counter, not for a bat, but for the jar of salt my grandfather had left there. I didn't even know why. Instinct, maybe. I unscrewed the lid and scattered a handful across the floor between us. Their laughter stopped. The biggest one's grin fell flat. For a moment, the storm outside roared louder. Then they backed away without another word, shoving the door open so hard the bell above it snapped off. I swept up the salt with trembling hands, pretending it was all normal. But I knew better. After that night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong. My grandfather didn't even look surprised when I told him. He just muttered, "Balance is fragile. You disrespect it, and evil walks in." I wanted to press him for answers, but fear kept me quiet. I focused on my shifts, counting cash, brewing coffee, stocking shelves. But little things chipped away at my sanity. Items moved when I wasn't looking. The cooler doors fogged up with handprints when no one was near. And always, the woods seemed alive, whispering against the glass. Mrs. Weaver came in more often, always late at night, always smiling in her crooked way. One evening, she caught me staring at the tree line beyond the lot. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked softly. I swallowed. Feel what? The hunger out there. It waits for foolish boys to open the door. She tapped her cane against the tile. Don't be that boy. Her words rattled me. I spent the rest of my shift jumpy, flinching at every gust of wind. When I finally locked up, the storm had quieted, but the silence was worse. I walked to my car, keys in hand, when I heard it. Low growls drifting from the trees. Not dogs, not anything I could name. I froze, staring into the dark. Two faint eyes blinked back at me, far too high off the ground. My legs nearly gave out, but I forced myself into the car, locking the doors, refusing to look back as I drove away. At home, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing my grandfather's words, Mrs. Weaver's warning, the sound of claws dragging across glass. My heart told me something was coming, something bigger than I wanted to believe. The storm returned 3 nights later. Sheets of rain hammered the store, thunder shaking the walls. I worked alone. My grandfather had gone home early, leaving me with his list of rituals, candles lit, salt lines drawn, wards checked. I followed it all, though my hands shook so bad I nearly dropped the lighter. Around midnight, the power flickered. The neon outside buzzed, sputtered, then died, leaving only the faint glow of the emergency lights. That's when I heard it, scraping at the glass doors, slow and deliberate. I froze behind the counter. The scraping turned to pounding, claws against metal, voices whispering my name. My name. I wanted to run, but my grandfather's words rooted me. Balance is fragile, disrespected, and evil walks in. I grabbed a jar of salt, my last defense, and stood my ground. The doors rattled hard, nearly breaking. Shadows pressed against the glass, shapes too large to be human, too twisted to belong here. I raised the salt, heart pounding. "You can't come in," I whispered. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The storm howled, but the doors stilled. The shadows slipped back into the trees. Silence fell heavy. When my grandfather returned at dawn, I told him everything. He didn't scold me. He just nodded, eyes tired. "Now you understand." I swept the floors, restocked shelves, served customers like nothing had happened. But each night, when I turned the key in the lock, I felt the eyes waiting in the woods. And I knew this store wasn't just mine to run. It was mine to guard. Fear teaches us limits, but respect teaches us survival. Courage isn't about ignoring danger. It's about listening to warnings, honoring what you don't understand, and protecting what others take for granted. Some doors are meant to stay shut, and some balances, once broken, can never be restored. I never imagined a small corner store could feel so familiar and foreign at the same time. Riverside Corner Market had been my go-to stop for months, sometimes for a quick cup of coffee, other times for an impulse snack or a last-minute gift. I'd moved to Seattle 3 years ago, chasing a career in graphic design that wasn't really paying the bills yet. I lived in a cramped studio not far from Maple Street, a building lined with old brick and overgrown ivy, and this market had quietly become my second home. The clerk would know me by name after a few visits, the aisles familiar enough to navigate in a few seconds, and the smell of stale chips mixed with coffee was oddly comforting. But I also carried a thread of unease that week. Earlier, I'd been in another store, a bigger chain down on Pine, when a man had started shouting at a cashier for no reason at all. The way he got in her space, leaned over the counter, and barked accusations made my chest tighten, even in the safety of another street. I couldn't shake it. So when I found myself wandering into Riverside Corner Market on that chilly March evening, I carried that tension like a weight in my pocket. It was around 6:45 p.m. the fluorescent lights flickering above the aisles in that uneven way they sometimes do. I started toward the jewelry display near the counter, browsing inexpensive rings for a friend's birthday. I liked this section. Small, intimate, manageable. The young cashier, a girl named Alyssa, glanced at me and smiled, her blonde ponytail bouncing as she straightened a row of candy bars. I nodded in return. Then he walked in. At first glance, he looked unremarkable. A man in his mid-30s, dark hoodie, baseball cap pulled low, jeans. But there was something in the way he moved, a slight jerky energy that set off a ping of warning in my mind. He smiled as he approached the counter. "Hey," he said casual. "Can you help me pick out a ring for my girlfriend?" I hesitated, unsure if he was addressing me or Alyssa. I nodded anyway, trying to appear polite. He lingered, leaning on the counter, and that's when his tone shifted. He started making offhand jokes about a crazy wife and commenting on my hair, my clothes, little things that didn't make sense. I stepped back, thinking maybe he'd leave, but he followed. His voice grew louder, drawing the attention of other shoppers. A knot formed in my stomach. Alyssa intervened, holding out a hand toward him. "Sir, I'm sorry. Those are display items," she said, polite but firm. He waved her off, laughing, making crude comments and pointing toward the candy and jewelry, as if mocking her. Then he started rattling shelves, toppling a small candy display with a clatter that made my heart skip. People began pulling out their phones, recording, murmuring among themselves. I felt frozen, a spectator trapped in real life, but knowing I couldn't just stand there. When he grabbed a small silver ring from the display and tucked it into his pocket, my panic spiked. I instinctively moved closer to the counter, trying to alert Alyssa without escalating him. He noticed my movement and shot me a sharp look that made my stomach churn. By now the aisles were tense. Shoppers stepped back, their voices rising in nervous chatter. I could hear sirens faintly in the distance, and I realized someone must have called security. The man's movements grew erratic, and I felt a bead of sweat run down my temple. My mind raced through what to do: run, stay calm, keep my hands visible. 100 scenarios played out, none satisfying. Within minutes, police arrived. 2 officers came through the door, brisk and efficient. The man tried to push past them, yelling insults, but they restrained him quickly, cuffing him behind his back. The sudden order restored some calm, though the tension still lingered in the tight aisles. Alyssa breathed out, shaking but grateful. I stepped outside, letting the cool air wash over me. My hands still trembled, my pulse heavy in my ears. The flickering street lamp cast long shadows across Maple Street, making it feel suddenly alien. The man was gone from my line of sight, led away in handcuffs, but I couldn't shake the lingering unease. It wasn't just about the robbery, or even the chaos. It was the realization that a small, familiar place, the one I trusted, the one that felt safe, could so quickly become unpredictable. That night I walked home slowly, keys clutched tightly in my hand, eyes scanning every shadow. Riverside Corner Market had always been ordinary, but now it carried a new weight. I had seen what fear looks like when it creeps in disguised as someone polite, someone familiar, someone almost invisible until it wasn't. After that night, I couldn't stop replaying the incident. Every time I walked past Riverside Corner Market, I felt that prickling anxiety, that sense of being watched. The neighborhood was normally quiet in the evenings, just the distant hum of traffic and the occasional dog barking. But I found myself walking with my shoulders tense, keys between my fingers like a makeshift weapon. Alyssa, who had worked the counter that night, texted me the next day. "Are you okay?" she wrote. Her message was simple, but I could feel the worry behind it. I replied that I was, mostly, though I couldn't promise I'd stop flinching at loud noises. She didn't push. She knew the kind of weight incidents like this left on people. The next week, I returned to the store, trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy. I lingered in the aisles longer than usual, browsing snacks I didn't need, coffee I wasn't really thirsty for. I watched Alyssa interact with customers, her voice calm, her gestures practiced and careful. She smiled at me, and I returned it, though my chest still felt tight. The man's behavior haunted me, not just because it had been aggressive, but because it had been so arbitrary. There was no clear motive beyond chaos, no personal vendetta. It reminded me that danger often doesn't need reason, it only needs presence. A few days later, I was at the market again, this time around noon. The sunlight fell through the dusty windows, and I noticed small details I'd missed before. A scuff mark on the tile near the counter, the way Alyssa carefully stacked candy bars by height, a faint scent of lavender from her perfume. It was mundane, grounding, almost therapeutic. Then, a man walked in. Not the same one, but similar. Mid-30s, hoodie, baseball cap. My stomach clenched immediately. He smiled at the cashier, talking about rings, gifts, and relationships. I froze. My mind went back to that evening, to the fear, the chaos. I wanted to step in, say something, do anything, but I hesitated. Alyssa noticed the tension in my posture. She nodded subtly toward the back of the store, gesturing that she could handle him. I backed away, staying near the magazine rack. The man's tone shifted in a similar pattern to before. Jokes, unsolicited comments, teasing about the cashier. He started leaning too close, invading personal space. I felt that old knot in my stomach. This time, though, I was ready. My hand stayed near my keys. My body stayed alert. I watched, not just as a passive observer, but as someone who had learned the hard way how quickly situations could escalate. The man eventually left, muttering under his breath, and I exhaled slowly, feeling the adrenaline drain. It was a small victory, but a necessary one. I realized that fear wasn't something to ignore or dismiss. It was a signal, a tool to help navigate spaces that could be unsafe. That week, I started paying closer attention to my surroundings, to the people around me, to the ways public spaces could suddenly become threatening. I even began carrying a small whistle, a precaution more for peace of mind than real defense. I also began noticing other shoppers differently, the subtle ways people reacted when tension filled a room, how kindness or firmness could diffuse situations before they escalated. It became a study in human behavior as much as a survival skill. By the end of the week, Riverside Corner Market felt a little less menacing. The aisles were the same, the flickering lights and coffee aroma unchanged. But I had changed. I had learned to trust my instincts, to read the energy in a room before it became a problem, and to recognize that personal safety sometimes means asserting boundaries calmly, but firmly. The city outside was still unpredictable, still filled with strangers whose intentions couldn't be read at a glance. But I felt a small sense of empowerment in knowing I could navigate it better than before. That night, walking home past the flickering street lamps, I felt that same nervous awareness, but also a sense of readiness. Spring settled over Seattle with a chill that refused to let go, even as March gave way to April. Riverside Corner Market felt different now, though the aisles hadn't changed. Every time I walked in, I carried that invisible thread of vigilance, a constant hum at the back of my mind. The store had become a quiet test of my nerves, a place where I could measure how far my fear had evolved into cautious confidence. One Friday evening around 6:30 p.m., I was there again. The small bell above the door jingled, and I turned, expecting the familiar faces of local shoppers or Alyssa behind the counter. But the man walked in. Hoodie, cap, same mid-30s look that had haunted me before. My stomach sank immediately. His eyes scanned the store slowly, calculatingly, and when they landed on me, I felt the same cold dread. "Hey there," he said casually, approaching the jewelry display. He spoke about a gift for a girlfriend again, as if this were an innocent routine. But I could see the subtle aggression in the way he leaned forward, the flicker of impatience in his hands. I didn't move toward him, didn't even respond, but I didn't look away. Alyssa noticed me stiffen and gave a discreet nod. She knew I could intervene if necessary, but also knew that drawing his attention unnecessarily might provoke him. He began poking at the rings behind the counter, lightly rattling the small display case. I felt a familiar knot in my stomach, a warning I could no longer ignore. "Excuse me," I said quietly, stepping closer. "You need to step back. Those items are behind the counter." His head turned slowly toward me, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, just browsing," he said, his tone light, but there was an edge I recognized immediately. I stayed firm, arms at my sides, heart hammering. I realized then that fear alone wouldn't protect me. I had to act. I moved slightly closer to Alyssa and whispered, "Call the police. Now." She nodded, reaching for her phone behind the counter. The man noticed and froze, eyes narrowing. He started muttering under his breath, stepping back but not leaving. I held my ground, keeping my body language steady, my hands visible. The tension stretched for what felt like an eternity. He waved at other shoppers, making subtle threats disguised as jokes. My pulse raced, but I focused on breathing, on staying calm. The sirens came before he could act further. The officers entered swiftly, restraining him again. He shouted, struggled, but this time I wasn't paralyzed. I had learned that calm, deliberate action could prevent chaos from escalating further. After the police took him away, the store emptied slowly. Alyssa leaned against the counter, sighing. "You handled that really well," she said, and I nodded, though the adrenaline still shook my hands. I realized that this wasn't just about surviving someone else's chaos. It was about understanding the power of self-control and awareness in moments of fear. That week I began journaling about the incidents. I wrote down what had happened, how I had felt, how I responded. I noted small observations, the way body language changes under stress, how subtle words can escalate tension, and the importance of trusting my instincts. These entries became a map of sorts, guiding me through the uncertainty of urban life. By the end of April, Riverside Corner Market felt less threatening. Not because the man had disappeared completely, he was likely still out there, but because I had changed. I could navigate the aisles with a sense of cautious awareness, understanding my surroundings and the potential for danger without letting fear dominate my actions. I realized then that survival wasn't just about avoiding harm. It was about internalizing lessons from past encounters and using them to prepare for the future. May arrived with a persistent drizzle, typical Seattle weather, and the corner market became a sort of refuge from both the rain and my restless thoughts. Life outside the store continued, but I found myself drawn back, sometimes simply to watch human behavior unfold in its quiet, often tense rhythms. People have a way of revealing themselves in small spaces, through hesitation, curiosity, or sudden aggression. One evening, I arrived at the store just as Alyssa was closing her register. A new face appeared, a young man, maybe 25, looking nervous, scanning the shelves quickly. At first he seemed harmless, just browsing, but the way he kept glancing over his shoulder, the way he fidgeted, reminded me of how fear manifests in subtle gestures. I watched him carefully, noting each movement, waiting to see if he would escalate or simply leave. "Can I help you find something?" Alyssa asked, friendly but cautious. He flinched slightly at her voice. No, just looking," he mumbled. He picked up a pack of gum, turned it over in his hands, then set it down abruptly. Something about his energy made me uneasy. I stayed nearby, keeping a mental note of exits, of the layout of the aisles and of the cashier's location. Suddenly, the young man bolted toward the door, grabbing a small bottle of soda along the way. My heart jumped, but I didn't scream or run. I simply stepped closer, maintaining visibility while staying calm. Alyssa's voice rang out, firm. "Hey, wait!" The man hesitated, then froze at the entrance, looking at the street. In that pause, I realized that remaining calm could sometimes prevent a situation from spiraling. The man dropped the bottle, muttered an apology, and ran out into the rain. No one was hurt, but the tension lingered in the air. Alyssa exhaled audibly. "That was close," she said. I nodded silently, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach. It was a reminder that danger could appear in unexpected forms, sometimes minor, sometimes severe, but always demanding awareness. Later that night, I walked home under the drizzle, keys clutched tightly, flashlight app on my phone in one hand. I thought about the first encounter months ago and the lessons I'd learned since then. Vigilance isn't paranoia, it's preparation. Fear isn't weakness, it's a signal. I realized that every interaction, every moment of tension, shaped how I perceived safety and how I could protect both myself and others. By June, the store felt like a small microcosm of the city itself, chaotic, unpredictable, and alive with human energy. I noticed the elderly man who came in every Thursday for bread, the teenage girl who lingered in the candy aisle, shy but polite. I recognized the patterns of normalcy as much as I noted the irregularities that demanded attention. The line between mundane and dangerous had never been sharper in my mind. I also began speaking to Alyssa more about these incidents, sharing strategies and observations. Together, we developed subtle routines, staying aware of exits, maintaining eye contact with unfamiliar customers, and using calm, firm communication to defuse potential aggression. It wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. Through these experiences, I realized that life in a city is a balance between trust and caution. The streets, the stores, the alleys, they hold both kindness and unpredictability. And the key isn't hiding from it, but navigating it with awareness, confidence, and respect for your own boundaries. By July, Riverside Corner Market had become both a workplace and a classroom. I no longer felt paralyzed by fear. Instead, I felt equipped. My encounters with the aggressive man and other tense situations had taught me resilience, observation, and measured action. I carried my keys in hand, sometimes a small whistle, sometimes just my alert mind. Each item was a reminder that preparedness isn't about fear, it's about agency. One night, as I was leaving after a late shift, I noticed a young woman lingering outside the store, seemingly nervous. I recognized the signs, shoulders tight, glancing around, clutching her bag close. My instincts kicked in immediately. I approached, calmly introducing myself. "Everything okay?" I asked. She shook her head, explaining that a man had been following her earlier on the street. I guided her to the corner where streetlights were brighter, kept an eye out for any unusual movements, and waited until she felt safe enough to continue. As she walked away, she looked back and gave a small, grateful smile. That moment crystallized everything I had learned. Awareness, calm intervention, and empathy matter as much as personal safety. Fear was no longer paralyzing. It was informative. By the time August rolled around, I had fully integrated these lessons into daily life. I watched the people of Maple Street, not just as a shopper or an employee, but as someone attuned to the currents of human behavior. I knew when to trust, when to step back, and when to act. I realized that small spaces like Riverside Corner Market were mirrors of the world itself, mundane, chaotic, and full of unseen patterns. Reflecting on the past months, I understood that survival isn't about avoiding risk entirely. It's about cultivating awareness, exercising calm judgment, and respecting one's own boundaries. Fear is not weakness. It's a compass pointing toward necessary action. I still go to Riverside Corner Market, still buy my coffee and chips, still chat with Alyssa about life and customers. The fluorescent lights flicker as always, the aisles are narrow, and the world outside remains unpredictable. But now when I step inside, I carry more than just a shopping list. I carry knowledge, awareness, and the quiet confidence that I can navigate the chaos around me. Fear can be a guide, vigilance can be empowering, and kindness and awareness can coexist with caution. Life is unpredictable, but we can meet it prepared, grounded, and aware. Some people say they're just trying to get back on their feet. Others don't even pretend. I was somewhere in the middle, 25, broke, tired, and one semester short of a degree I couldn't afford to finish. Most nights, I told myself I was just riding it out. helping my mom after her chemo, saving a little, working nights at Walmart until I figured it out. But the truth was, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't want to see people I went to high school with. I didn't want to explain to anyone why I was still in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, filling shelves at 3 a.m. while the rest of the world moved forward. I started on graveyard shifts in early November. By February, the night crew felt more familiar than most of my own family. There was Marta, a single mom who kept candy in her apron for energy. Rico, who spoke 3 languages but mostly used sarcasm. And me, just trying to disappear into the routine. I liked the quiet. After midnight, there were no customers. Just boxes, the occasional radio static, and the humming white noise of fluorescent lights. The world felt paused. That night, February 9th, it was colder than usual. I remember because the windows on the inside were fogging up. I was restocking air purifiers in aisle 14, right where cleaning products and floor care meet. I always liked that spot. Smelled like lemon-scented calm. It was just before midnight when I noticed him. A guy walked into the aisle, mid-30s maybe. Windbreaker zipped to the chin, slight limp. He wasn't carrying a cart or basket, but he had a 12-pack of soda tucked under one arm. He walked slowly, not browsing, not rushing, just moving with this strange patience. I figured he was a last-minute shopper. Happens all the time. Someone runs in at 11:58 to grab milk or whatever before closing. But he kept looking up, at the ceiling camera. Those little half-domes, black mirrors that reflect nothing but your own uncertainty. He stared at one for a solid 5 seconds before he asked, quiet, almost casual, like we were old co-workers. "These cameras still record after midnight?" I blinked. Yeah, they're 24/7. He didn't look at me, just nodded, then set the soda down. Gently, too gently, like he was placing it there for show. Then he walked away. I didn't think much of it. Just another odd night at Walmart. You see all types. But something felt off in my gut. That soda wasn't a purchase. It was a prop. I tried to shake it. Went back to stacking boxes. Marta passed by a few minutes later, making a joke about how this brand of air freshener smelled like a divorce. I laughed and went back to work. A few minutes later, Greg walked in. Greg was one of our regulars, retired vet, kind of a lonely guy. He'd come in late, grab a couple frozen dinners and a 2-liter of ginger ale, chat with whoever was stocking shelves. He always wore a battered Steelers jacket and mismatched shoes. Said it was his superstition. He nodded as he passed. "Quiet night, huh?" "Yeah," I said. "Ghost town." Then, loud and sharp, came a pop. Not like a gunshot, not yet. It sounded more like metal collapsing, like a shelving unit giving way. Greg and I both looked toward the back of the aisle. Then came the second sound, unmistakable this time. A gunshot. I dropped behind a pallet, heart thudding in my throat. My ears rang. Another shout, a man yelling something, followed by a second blast. I peeked around the edge. Greg was on the floor, blood everywhere. His body had dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. His eyes were wide open, not blinking. The man from earlier, the one in the windbreaker, was gone. I scrambled back toward the front counter, half crawling, half running. Hit the panic button behind the register. It buzzed once. Then silence. It was a long 11 minutes before the cops arrived. I remember exactly how long because I counted every second. One other person had seen him, Marta. She told police that the guy had tried getting into the break room about 20 minutes before the shooting. She thought he was high, twitchy, talking to himself, muttering something about the recordings and how they never stop watching. The police did what they always do, took statements, locked down the building, asked for descriptions that none of us were entirely confident about. The shooter had walked in, wandered, waited, then left through grocery exit 3, just as chaos erupted. Greg survived somehow. The bullet had shattered his jaw and nicked an artery. They said if it had been a millimeter over, he wouldn't have made it. I visited him once in the hospital, just stood there. He was unconscious, hooked to machines, a white bandage covering the left side of his face. I didn't say a word. Walmart shut down for 3 days. Corporate sent counselors. They handed out pamphlets and free donuts and told us to take our time, processing the event. But when the doors reopened, they still expected the floors to be mopped and the cereal displays rebuilt. I tried to go back. Lasted 4 more shifts. Every time I passed ISIL 14, I felt it. Not fear, not even trauma. Just this pressure, like the air itself remembered. Before I left for good, I asked our security guy to show me the footage. I told him I needed closure. We watched the guy, hoodie, limp, windbreaker, walk into the aisle. He wandered for 37 minutes, didn't steal, didn't yell, just paced. But every few minutes he stopped and looked directly at the cameras, dead still. One shot of him standing under the dome above aisle 14 gave me chills. His face was blank, eyes open, no emotion, like he was waiting for something only he could hear. He didn't even pull the trigger right away, just stood and stared, until finally something inside him broke. Then the shots rang out, and before he vanished, the mic caught one sentence. Just one. They saw everything, and they still did nothing. I left Walmart 2 weeks later. Took a job at the local distribution center, sorting mail in silence from midnight to 6. No customers, no cameras, no aisle 14. I told myself it was just another disturbed man, just a freak incident. But late at night, when I see security cameras, especially those dome ones, I get this cold wave up my spine, because I know what they caught. I know what I saw, and I know he was right about one thing. The cameras did see everything, and they still did nothing. Sometimes horror isn't about what people do, it's about what others ignore. It's easy to dismiss someone as crazy, or broken, or dangerous. But when you stare long enough into a lens, when you know you're being watched and still feel invisible, something inside you can break. And when it breaks, it doesn't always make a sound. Until it does. I never planned on settling in Norfolk, but life has a way of steering you where you least expect. After leaving the Navy, I didn't want to drift too far from the coast, so I found myself in a modest duplex just a short walk from the shipyard. The pay wasn't great, but it kept the lights on and left me with enough to feed myself and Shadow, my rescue mutt with a shepherd's bark and the heart of a soldier. Life after service was quieter than I imagined. The house was small, the neighborhood a patchwork of flickering street lamps and leaning mailboxes, but it was steady. Nights were mine, walking home after shifts, cooking something simple, and unwinding in front of the TV. Shadow never left my side, and in his steady presence I found comfort. Still, there was a routine to everything. I worked nights, got off late, and always returned at the same time. 2 blocks down, past the gas station, through a row of narrow streets where the streetlights buzzed and the air smelled faintly of salt. I'd pass the same houses, the same parked cars, and sometimes even the same porch light flicking on as I went by. In the Navy, routine had been survival. At home, I thought it was safety too. But what I didn't realize was that patterns make you predictable, and predictable makes you vulnerable. It wasn't until one damp Thursday night in the spring of 2011 that I learned just how fragile that comfort was. That was the night I saw the car waiting across the street, its engine humming low, exhaust ghosting into the cold air, headlights dark. A shadow sat inside, unmoving, watching. At first I told myself it was nothing. Cars idled all the time, people waiting on friends or smoking a last cigarette before heading out. But something about the stillness inside that car unsettled me. No phone glow, no radio, no movement. Just a figure. I kept walking, Shadow tugging gently at the leash, his ears pricked like he sensed my unease. The car never moved. By the time I reached my door, my pulse was drumming. I unlocked fast, stepped inside, and clicked the deadbolt. Through the curtain, I could still see the faint mist of exhaust drifting under the street lamp. I set my keys on the counter and tried to shake it off. Routine. That's all it was. Someone killing time in the wrong place. But then Shadow stiffened, hackles up, his growl low and dangerous. I muted the TV and listened. The sound came faint at first. Not a knock, not really. More like fingernails brushing against the wood. Tap, pause, tap. My breath caught. Shadow lunged toward the door, barking with a fury that rattled the walls. The tapping stopped. Then came the voice. Low, hushed, almost casual. Pizza delivery, $20. I froze. My mouth went dry. I hadn't ordered anything. I called back. Wrong house. My voice echoed too sharp in the small space. The voice came again, coaxing. Address checks out, buddy. Just open up. It's cold out here. I'll show you the order slip. I moved to the upstairs window, pulling the curtain just enough to see. A tall, thin man stood on the porch, hood pulled tight. His hands were empty. No box, no bag, nothing. My gut clenched. Whatever he wanted, it wasn't to deliver food. Where's the pizza then? I called down, forcing steel into my voice. The man shifted, glancing toward the side window like he was trying to peer inside. Shadow slammed his paws against the door, teeth bared in a snarl. The man didn't flinch. It's right here, he said, irritation bleeding through his tone. Just let me in for a second. I'll explain. Every instinct I had screamed at me. His voice wasn't nervous. It wasn't confused. It was practiced, steady, like he'd done this before. I flicked on the porch light. The bulb buzzed to life, casting pale yellow across his face. Our eyes met. His features were gaunt, sharp angles under the hood. His expression didn't shift when the light hit him. It just hardened like a mask dropping. Cold, calculating eyes locked on mine for one long second. Then, like a switch flipped, he bolted. He sprinted down the steps, across the street, and into the idling sedan. The car roared to life, tires screeching on wet asphalt, taillights glowing red before disappearing into the night. I stood frozen, chest pounding. Shadow barked wildly, claws scratching the floor as if he could tear through it to chase. My own knees shook as I backed away from the window, adrenaline still flooding me. It wasn't just a stranger. It was a setup. He'd been waiting. And if I had opened that door, even for a second, I knew deep down he would have been inside before I had time to think. The next morning, I went to the police. I explained everything, the car, the tapping, the voice, the empty hands. The officer behind the desk took down notes, nodding politely but without urgency. Did he try to break in? He asked. No, but he wouldn't leave. He lied. He was waiting for me. The officer sighed, setting his pen down. We'll log it, but without a plate number or an actual break-in, there's not much we can do. Probably some guy casing houses. You were smart not to open up. I left the station angry. It wasn't just casing houses. The way he timed it, the way he spoke. It was deliberate. He knew my routine. He knew when I'd be walking home. That night, I changed everything. I carried a flashlight baton in my bag. I varied my route home, cutting through different blocks. I added another lock to the door and reinforced the window latches. Shadow never left my side. His ears twitched at every sound, his body stiff and alert. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of his voice. Calm, steady, as if he already expected me to believe him. That haunted me more than anything else. Not the tapping, not the chase, but the confidence in the lie. The police dismissed it. My neighbors never even noticed. But I knew better. Sometimes danger doesn't smash through the door. Sometimes it whispers and waits for you to open it yourself. Time dulled the fear, but it never erased it. Weeks passed without another incident, and soon the duplex returned to its familiar rhythm. Work, home, dinner, bed. But I never walked the same again. Every parked car made me tense. Every idling engine made me slow down and look twice. Shadow sensed it too. Even years later, he'd growl at shadows in the street, his bark deeper, harsher than before. We had both learned the same lesson that night. Home only feels safe until someone reminds you how fragile it really is. Friends brushed it off when I told them. "Probably just a junkie," they said. "You scared him off." Maybe. But I can still see his eyes in the porch light, cold and patient. That wasn't desperation. That was calculation. Now, when I look back, what stays with me isn't what happened. It's what almost happened. How close I came to opening that door. How easy it would have been. Just one bad decision made out of tiredness or politeness, and the story would have ended differently. Every night I walked home after that, I reminded myself, routine is comfort, but it's also weakness. Someone out there had watched me enough to know when I'd be standing on that porch fumbling with my keys. That thought still keeps me sharp, because sometimes the scariest threat doesn't break glass or force locks. Sometimes it just waits quietly, wearing a lie like a mask, hoping you'll be the one to let it in. The greatest danger often comes not from force, but from deception. A stranger doesn't need to break your door if he can convince you to open it yourself. Always trust your instincts, question what doesn't add up, and remember, your safety is worth more than politeness. I never thought I'd end up on a dark gravel road at midnight, clutching a pizza bag like my life depended on it. My name's Ryan Colton. I was 23, living in Eugene, Oregon, and scraping by on a series of dead-end jobs. Delivering pizzas was far from glamorous, but it paid for gas, rent, and whatever my mom insisted I save for something better. I wasn't proud of it, but it kept me moving. November nights in Oregon have a way of swallowing sound. Thick pines line every county road, and moonlight barely reaches the asphalt. Most nights, deliveries were quick, familiar, and safe. Neighborhoods I knew like the back of my hand, short drives, porch lights flicking on when I approached. But that night, everything felt off. It was 11:50 p.m. My last run, I hoped. One large pepperoni, breadsticks, and a 2-liter soda to a location my GPS insisted existed, but no one in the shop had ever delivered to. Out past the suburbs, past the last gas station, down a county road that stretched into farmland and shadows. The further I drove, the tighter my chest felt. The driveway appeared, gravel crunching under my tires. 2 football fields at least, lined by trees that towered over my Honda like silent sentinels. A single porch light glowed faintly at the end. A figure sat on the steps, smoking. I slowed, hoping for a friendly nod, a wave, anything. But the man stood when my headlights hit him, moving quickly, eyes hard. "You the pizza guy?" he barked. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile, fumbling with the bag. "You sit at the end of the driveway for a while, didn't you?" "No, just got here," I lied, more out of instinct than intent. His face darkened. "Don't lie to me. I saw your headlights sitting there." I froze. Trees blocked that view. How did he know? Before I could respond, he snatched the bag, muttering about it being cold. "He's here!" he yelled toward the house. Shadows moved. 2 figures emerged, one from behind the shed, another from the side of the house. "Run!" Instinct screamed. I stepped back toward my car. A hand gripped my shoulder, slammed me against the window. My head rattled. Another voice. "Wallet, phone, now." I handed everything over, shaking. Cigarette smoke burned my nose as the first man leaned in. "We know where you live. You tell the cops, your family's next." I nodded, barely breathing. They shoved me back, threw the bag on the ground. "Get the hell out." Engines sputtering, tires spitting gravel. I didn't stop until I reached a lit gas station. Shaking, I borrowed a clerk's phone to call my manager, canceled my debit card, praying it wasn't over. That night changed everything. Every knock, every dark driveway afterward, made my pulse spike. The following weeks, I couldn't shake the memory. Sleep became a stranger. Every strange sound, every shadow passing my window at night, sent me gripping the sheets. My mother called daily. "Ryan, you okay?" she asked one morning, voice soft. I forced a laugh, brushing off her worry. I couldn't tell her the full story. How could I explain that I'd been so close to becoming another headline, the way fear can wrap around you and refuse to let go? The idea that someone had known exactly where I lived, tracked my every move, it didn't leave my chest. Driving became anxiety. Any trip after dusk, no matter how short, felt like navigating a minefield. Gas stations became danger zones. I learned to wait, calculate, and watch for exits. I memorized the layouts of every station I visited, noting alternate ways out, distances to the road, and possible hiding spots. Paranoia? Maybe. But it saved me. Work felt hollow. The pizza shop became a cage. I loved the tips, but every long delivery felt like rolling the dice with my life. I started calling in for early shifts, asking coworkers to cover evening runs. Some complained, some understood. No one could see the fear lingering behind my eyes, the silent rehearsal of escape routes in my mind. One night I was parked in a grocery store lot, waiting for my last delivery of the evening. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Shadows of trees swayed, headlights passed, and I flinched at each passing reflection. A man walked past my car, hands in his pockets. My chest constricted, but he moved on. Just a passerby, nothing more. Still, I realized my behavior had changed. Fear had become a guide, whispering caution at every intersection. That night, I made a decision. No more dark deliveries, no more isolated roads, not worth the risk. I found a warehouse job a few weeks later. Same town, lower pay, but safer. Cameras on every corner, co-workers around. Night shifts still existed, but no one expected me to drive into the middle of nowhere, alone, with cash and credit cards on hand. I walked the aisles, stocking shelves, moving pallets, scanning barcodes. The routine was dull but steady. The constant presence of others was reassuring. Every now and then I'd glance at the security monitors, half expecting to see someone lurking. But the footage was predictable, safe. The fear never fully vanished. On rainy nights, when the lot outside was empty, I would still feel the phantom weight of hands on my shoulder, the whispered threat to my family. My pulse would spike, and I'd grip the clipboard I carried like a weapon. Rationality slowly reclaimed ground, but muscle memory remembered panic in ways my mind couldn't undo. I started preparing differently for life on the road. Routes were planned with redundancy, stops calculated for safety, cell phones charged, and apps preloaded with emergency contacts. No more improvising. I even considered self-defense classes, anything to regain a sense of control. The incident reshaped how I interacted with strangers. Courteous? Yes. Trusting? No. A smile, a nod, those were safe. Extended conversation or isolated encounters? Not anymore. My worldview contracted into caution, and I accepted it. Months later, I revisited the roads that had haunted me. Daylight only. I noted houses, driveways, and intersections. Familiar territory became a map of potential hazards. It was tedious, almost obsessive, but comforting. I wanted to feel prepared, not trapped by memory. Sometimes I imagined what could have happened if I'd reacted differently. If I had stayed frozen at the porch, delayed in panic. I had been lucky. An inch or a second could have changed everything. Thinking about it made me respect the fragility of ordinary nights. At home, I told myself to move on. Mom noticed the tension and suggested therapy. I agreed. Talking to someone professional helped separate fear from reality, anxiety from instinct. I learned to acknowledge trauma without letting it dictate every action. Even so, certain triggers persisted. Gravel driveways, the smell of cold pine at night, isolated lights. My body reacted before my mind could. Reflexes born from survival do not vanish easily. By the end of 2019, I had settled into a cautious rhythm. Day jobs, daylight errands, familiar streets. The fear had softened, but never disappeared. I didn't crave danger, and I didn't romanticize bravery. Awareness, preparedness, and instinct had replaced recklessness. Every time I drove past a dark road or an empty driveway, I reminded myself, control what you can, respect what you cannot. That night on the county road had taught me more than fear. It had taught me caution, foresight, and humility. Life could change in seconds, and safety is never guaranteed. I still deliver sometimes, but only in familiar neighborhoods, with lights on and eyes open. The world doesn't owe you safety. The lesson is simple but enduring. Always respect your instincts, avoid unnecessary risks, and never take ordinary nights for granted. Because one wrong turn, one misstep, and ordinary darkness can become a memory you'll carry forever. Life doesn't guarantee safety. Awareness, caution, and respecting your instincts can be the diffy. I still remember the smell of maple leaves and wood smoke that October, the way Alderbrook looked dipped in gold under the fading sun. I was 10, and Halloween was everything that mattered in the world. My best friend Leo Turner and I had been counting down the days since summer ended. The town had never felt so alive. That year, the mayor announced our first ever Halloween street fair. Booths lined Main Road from the post office clear down to St. Mary's Church. The air smelled of caramel corn, cider, and the damp sweetness of fallen leaves. Strings of orange lights hung overhead, and the whole place glowed like a movie set. Leo and I went as always, me in my scarecrow costume, him in a pirate getup that kept losing its eye patch. We were too old to need parents tagging along, but too young to pretend Halloween wasn't still magic. As the night got darker, we heard kids whispering about a place called Ghost Lane behind St. Mary's. Supposedly, it only appeared on Halloween night. Some said a carnival worker had hung himself there back in the 40s, and his ghost waited every year for kids brave enough to follow him. Leo's grin stretched wide. We gotta see it. I laughed, nervous. You're out of your mind. He nudged my shoulder. Come on, Ethan. Don't you want to find out? We slipped away while the band played near the square. Behind the church, the fair's glow vanished, replaced by moonlight and shadow. Between two brick walls, we found a narrow passage choked with wet leaves and broken fence posts. You think this is it? I whispered. Only one way to know. We walked in, flashlights trembling in our hands. The air turned colder, heavy with damp earth. Halfway down, a figure appeared at the far end, a tall man in a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat, holding a pumpkin lantern that flickered in his grip. Come closer, boys, he said, voice rough but almost gentle. Brave kids get special candy. I thought it was part of the fair until Leo whispered, Ethan, look at his feet. Bare, mud-caked. But the ground beneath was spotless. No footprints, no tracks. The pumpkin light dimmed and flared again. His eyes gleamed hollow, glass black. His smile showed teeth burnt and crumbling. I screamed and we bolted, crashing through the alley, over fences, through weeds, until the lights and laughter of Main Street swallowed us again. No one believed a word. That night was the last time Alderbrook felt safe. For a few days, life went back to normal, or what passed for it. Mom chalked it up to imagination. You boys spooked yourselves, she said while packing my lunch. Leo pretended he wasn't scared, but I saw the way he jumped every time the wind rattled the fence outside school. We tried to convince ourselves it had been a prank, someone from the fair messing around. But every night I dreamed of that lantern. Sometimes it swung gently like it was hanging from a branch. Other times it floated closer until it filled my vision with fire. A week later, Leo showed up on my porch, pale and breathing hard. You gotta see this, he said. Behind the church, the town had started taking down the fair decorations. The alley was still there, but now it was blocked by a flimsy metal gate. On the wall beside it, carved into the brick, were 3 letters. L-E-O. They weren't there before. You did that, right? I asked, half accusing. He shook his head. Swear I didn't. We stood there staring, the wind whistling through the gap in the gate. Something metallic clinked deeper inside, faint and rhythmic, like a chain-tapping stone. Probably just the janitor, I said, though my voice cracked. Then why's it cold as hell back here? He wasn't wrong. The air bit like February, even though the sun was still shining on Main Street. That night, Leo called. Ethan, he said something. Who? The man. I heard him again. I sat up in bed, heart thudding. What did he say? He said, you wanted candy. The phone line hummed, and for a second I swore I heard breathing, slow and heavy, before Leo hung up. 2 days later, he wouldn't come to school. His mom said he was sick. By Friday, she stopped answering the phone. On Saturday morning, the sirens started. Police cars outside the Turner's house, neighbors whispering. Mom pulled me away from the window, but I'd already seen Mrs. Turner crying on the porch. Leo was gone. They said he'd gone out the night before and never came home. Last seen near St. Mary's. And behind the church fence, the gate to Ghost Lane hung wide open. The whole town joined the search that weekend. Grown-ups with flashlights combed the woods. Volunteers stapled missing posters to every pole. I went with my mom to drop off sandwiches at the fire station, pretending not to listen to the deputies talking. No footprints, one said. Mud everywhere, but nothing to follow. The other shook his head, like he just vanished. That night, unable to sleep, I biked to the church. The police tape flapped in the wind. I crouched near the gate and aimed my flashlight inside. The beam hit something shiny halfway down the path, a piece of metal. I squeezed through and walked closer. It was Leo's pirate sword. Plastic handle, foam blade, muddy at the tip. I picked it up and whispered his name. A rustling sound came from behind me. Leo? No answer, just the faint creak of branches. I turned back toward the street and saw it. At the far end of the lane, the same orange flicker, the pumpkin lantern. It swayed gently, the light too steady to be a trick of the eyes. Brave kids get special candy, the voice murmured. I dropped the sword and ran until my lungs burned. When the police checked again in daylight, there was nothing. No lantern, no footprints, no sign I'd been there except the sword lying in the mud. They sent me home with a warning to stay away from the church. But the nightmares kept coming, and each one ended the same way. Leo standing in the alley, eyes hollow, whispering, "You wanted candy." By 2005, I was 17, a senior trying to pretend childhood ghosts didn't exist. The alley had been sealed off with heavy fencing, but every October rumors started again, kids daring each other to peek through the cracks, claiming they saw a light moving in the dark. I never went back, not until Halloween night. That year, another kid went missing. 9-year-old Daniel Hughes, last seen near the fairgrounds. The same sirens, the same whispers. I couldn't stand it anymore. So I went. The church looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling, the bell silent. I parked my old pickup on Willow Street and walked the rest of the way. The new fence was padlocked, but one of the bars was loose enough to pull back. I slipped through, flashlight trembling. The alley was almost identical, the same damp air, the same smell of earth. Only now, the far end was darker than pitch. "Leo," I whispered, feeling ridiculous. Nothing. Then a soft glow blinked on, low to the ground. A pumpkin lantern, its grin carved jagged and cruel. I stepped closer, knees shaking. "Where's the boy? What do you want?" The lantern tilted, like someone holding it had cocked their head. The voice came again, clearer this time, raspy but calm. "Brave kids get special candy." My flashlight sputtered out. The glow brightened, revealing what stood behind it. Nothing. Just the lantern hovering, swaying in the air. Then, out of the shadows, a small figure appeared. A boy. Mud on his pajamas, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "Daniel," I breathed. He looked at me, lips moving soundlessly, and behind him the taller shape unfolded from the darkness. The hat, the coat, the impossible stillness. I turned and ran, tripping through the fence, slicing my arm on the wire. Behind me, a whisper chased on the wind. "You wanted candy, Ethan." The police found Daniel wandering the next morning near the cemetery gates, barefoot and shivering. He couldn't remember anything except a man with a pumpkin. They called it trauma. The town called it coincidence. But I knew. I left Alderbrook after graduation, swearing never to go back. Still, every October I'd dream of that alley. The glow, the voice, the promise. In 2015, Mom called to say they were finally demolishing the church to make room for a new parking lot. "They're clearing everything out next week," she said. I drove back that weekend. Couldn't help myself. The fence was gone, the alley exposed for the first time in years. The workers had dug up most of the old foundation, piles of brick and stone scattered everywhere. At the center of it all, half buried in dirt, was a rusted metal box. I pried it open. Inside were pieces of old carnival tickets, a broken chain, and something small wrapped in cloth. I unfolded it. A child's shoe. Leo's size. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of smoke and wet leaves. From somewhere deep in the torn-up lot came a soft flicker of orange light, weak but steady. I backed away, heart hammering, until I reached my truck. As I slammed the door, I heard it again, faint, almost swallowed by the wind. "Come back, boys. Brave kids get special candy." I never told anyone what I found. The church is gone now, paved over by the new parking lot. But every October, the maintenance crew swears they see a light glowing beneath the asphalt, like a lantern trapped underground, still burning. Curiosity and courage are not the same thing. Sometimes the line between bravery and recklessness is as thin as a whisper in the dark. What we chase out of curiosity may end up chasing us for the rest of our lives. And every choice, especially the ones made in youthful daring, leaves footprints, even when the ground looks clean. I moved into the apartment on a Tuesday afternoon. The air smelled faintly like bleach and new paint, which to me meant safety, a clean start. After 2 years of living with roommates and night shifts that chewed up my nerves, I finally had a space of my own. The building was small, tucked between a laundromat and a cafe on the edge of downtown. Old brick, 3 stories, 12 units. The kind of place that looked better at sunset, when the light softened all its cracks. The landlord, Mr. Brandt, handed me the keys with a warning smile. "People here keep to themselves," he said. "Makes life easier if you do the same." I laughed it off. "I'm quiet. You won't even know I'm here." He nodded. "Good. That's how we like it." The apartment was small but charming. 1 bedroom, 1 bath, a kitchen window overlooking the alley. I unpacked slowly, humming under my breath. Being a nurse meant I worked odd hours, sometimes back-to-back shifts. I didn't need noise or parties, I just wanted rest. The first few nights were blissfully uneventful. I'd come home around midnight, shower, read a few pages, and sleep like the dead. But on the 4th night, I noticed something strange. The light under my door, the small glow from my hallway lamp, was on when I came home. I always turned that lamp off before leaving. Always. I figured I must have forgotten in the rush to get to work. Nurses forget things all the time. But the same thing happened the next night, and the night after that. By the 5th day, I knew I wasn't imagining it. Someone had been inside my apartment. I told myself I was being paranoid. The building was old. Maybe faulty wiring was triggering the light somehow. Or maybe Mr. Brandt had come in to fix something. Still, I decided to test it. Before leaving for my shift that evening, I turned off every light, unplugged the lamp, and took a photo of the room for proof. When I got home at 2 a.m., the lamp was on again, glowing warm and steady. I felt my pulse climb into my throat. The plug was back in the wall. I ran my hand along the doorknob. Cold, smooth, locked from the outside just like I'd left it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with the lamp unplugged again, staring at the door. Nothing happened. By morning, I'd convinced myself I needed evidence. I bought a small indoor camera on my way home from work the next day, one of those motion-activated ones you can connect to your phone. I tucked it on a shelf near the door, angled perfectly toward the living room. That night, before I left for my shift, I checked the door twice, triple-locked it, and made sure the camera was rolling. The next morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee and opened the app. For the first few hours of footage, nothing happened. Then, around midnight, the doorknob turned. From the inside. The lock clicked open. A man stepped into the frame, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothes and gloves. He looked around calmly, as if checking to make sure the coast was clear. Then he reached for the knob, locked the door behind him, and walked out. The timestamp read 12:07 a.m. He had come from inside my apartment. My first thought was to call the police. My second thought was to throw up. After I caught my breath, I replayed the footage. The man didn't appear again. He moved naturally. No panic, no hurry. Like someone who belonged there. I called the police around 8:01 a.m. They arrived within the hour. Officer Mendez, a calm woman with tired eyes, watched the video twice. "Looks like he had a key," she said. "But how? I just moved in." "Could be an old tenant," she said. "Or someone copied it. We'll check the locks." They went door to door, questioning neighbors. I stayed in the hall, trying not to shake. Most people barely cracked their doors. Nobody had seen anyone. When they got to apartment 5, Mendez frowned. The door was dusty. The nameplate was blank. She knocked. No answer. "Who lives here?" she asked. "The landlord said it's vacant," I said. She radioed for permission to enter. When they pried the door open, a wave of stale air spilled out. The unit was empty. No furniture, no power, nothing but footprints in the dust. The landlord arrived, red-faced and sweating. "I told you that one's closed off," he said. "Closed off for 3 years?" Mendez asked. He hesitated. "Yeah, no one's lived there since the fire in 2019. She looked at me, then back at him. "We'll need to see all key records for this floor." By that evening, I'd packed my bags. I couldn't stay, not after seeing that video. The police replaced my lock and promised to patrol the area for a few nights, but it didn't make me feel safer. Mr. Brandt cornered me in the lobby as I was loading my car. "Listen, Clara," he said, rubbing his neck. "You sure you want to leave? We'll fix the locks." "I saw someone in my apartment," I said. "You'd leave too." He sighed. "Suit yourself." The next day, while I was at a friend's place across town, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Then it buzzed again. Voicemail. It was Brandt. His voice was shaky. "Hey, Clara, the police just finished checking everything. They found something in your old place. A note. It was stuck under the rug. I think you should know what it said." He paused. I could hear him breathing. "Next time, don't film me." I never went back to that building. The police said they'd keep the investigation open, but I knew better. Whoever it was had been inside for weeks, maybe longer. He had a copy of my key, maybe my schedule. He knew everything. I moved in with another nurse for a while, then found a smaller studio closer to the hospital. No shared hallways, no strange neighbors. I installed extra locks anyway. Sometimes when I'm leaving for work in the early morning, I still glance back at my door, half expecting to see a light flicker on inside. What scares me most isn't that someone broke in. It's how ordinary he looked. Calm, methodical, like unlocking someone's life was as routine as flipping a switch. It MAKESYOURE Ali's ETHATSAFETY isn't a BOUTGOOD low CKSORQITB build in GS. It's a BOUT Lu CKANDA BOUTPA yin GATTENTONBE FO RE. It's TOO LA TE. When I think back to that year, it always starts with the rain. It wasn't a gentle kind of rain either. It was the kind that soaked through your shoes and made the world look tired. We'd just moved into number 42 South Bridge Road, a small 2-story house with flaking paint and a sagging porch. To my 11-year-old eyes, it looked like an adventure. To my dad, it looked like defeat. Mom called it a fresh start. She tried to sound cheerful when she said it, but her smile never reached her eyes. Dad had been laid off from the plant a few months before, and since then he'd been different. Not angry at first, just quiet, like something inside him had broken and he didn't know how to fix it. The first few weeks were all about pretending. We unpacked boxes and painted the kitchen a faded yellow. Mom said felt warm. Dad sat by the window most days, drinking coffee that eventually turned into beer. He'd watch the drizzle streak down the glass like it was something personal. At night, I'd lie in bed and listen to the pipes creak. Sometimes I'd hear my parents whispering in the kitchen. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the weight of them, the kind that filled the air like smoke. One Thursday evening, I came downstairs to find Dad sitting in the dark, TV light flickering on his face. Mom stood by the counter, still in her care home uniform, exhaustion pulling her down. "You didn't eat?" she asked him. He didn't look up. No clean plates. "You could have washed one, love." He finally looked at her, eyes bloodshot. "You saying I don't do enough around here?" I froze halfway down the stairs. The edge in his voice scared me. "Nobody said that," she answered softly. "You just think it." After that night, silence became the third person in the house. By summer, Dad had stopped pretending. Every morning, he'd sit at the kitchen table with a can of lager and an empty stare. He didn't look for work anymore. "The world's gone to hell," he'd say. "No one wants a man who's worked with his hands." Mom picked up extra shifts, leaving before dinner most nights. I learned to make beans on toast, sometimes eggs if we had any left. Dad would watch me cook, eyes heavy. "You're the man of the house now, huh?" he'd mutter. I never knew if it was a compliment or a warning. One night I brought home a permission slip for a field trip, $25 to visit some caves. "It's for geography," I said, careful not to sound too hopeful. Dad laughed bitterly. $25 to look at rocks? I used to work 16-hour shifts for that. He crushed his can and tossed it toward the sink. "You think money grows on trees?" I didn't answer. Later, Mom found me in my room, eyes red. She kissed my forehead and signed the slip anyway. "Don't tell your dad," she whispered. But secrets never lasted long in that house. He found the bank statement a week later. I still remember the sound, his voice booming down the hallway like thunder. "You went behind my back." "It's just a school trip, Colin," Mom shouted. "You made me look like a fool." I sat at the top of the stairs, hugging my knees, listening to things fall and break. That night, I heard my mother cry for the first time. Afterward, the air in the house felt different, heavy. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Dad started disappearing for hours, sometimes all day. When he came back, he smelled of cigarettes and rain. "Just sorting things," he'd say. Mom found the envelope one morning. Amount overdue, $200. She confronted him, and the argument started all over again. That afternoon, I came home from school to find her sitting on the stairs, face pale. "Dad's gone," she said. "He left a note." I unfolded it carefully. His handwriting was shaky. "Can't take this anymore. Tell Jamie I tried." They found him sleeping in his car near the factory 2 days later. The police said he wasn't drunk, not high, just lost. When he came home, he didn't apologize. He just sat back at the kitchen table like nothing had happened. Mom didn't say much either. She stayed because leaving took strength she didn't have anymore. We started living around him, not with him. I'd leave early for school, stay late when I could. When I was home, I learned how to move quietly, how to keep from waking something dangerous. One night he looked at me and said, "You blame me, don't you?" I didn't know what to say. He was my dad. I wanted to hate him, But I couldn't. He laughed, a sound more tired than cruel. You will one day. Years later, I walked down South Bridge Road again. The house still stood there, leaning into the wind. The paint peeled, the garden wild. I stopped at the gate, hearing echoes of my childhood. The clink of a beer can, the hum of the fridge, the soft sound of my mother's voice trying to hold a family together. I realized then that fear doesn't always come from shouting or fists. Sometimes it comes from silence, the kind that seeps into you until you forget what normal sounds like. My father died a few years after that, in a small apartment by himself. Mom moved south and finally found peace in a little house with flowers in the yard. I visit her sometimes, and we don't talk much about him. Some stories don't need retelling. But sometimes, when it rains, I think about that chipped front door and the boy who once thought it was a castle. I think about how a home can hold both love and fear, how both can live under one roof and how silence can be its own kind of scream.